Thank you. I appreciate that. And glad to be with you all today. I tend to walk in Rome and all that, so I probably will not be up there very much. We're going to start off a little bit about, does anybody know who that is on the screen? Heisenberg, right? Breaking Bad. And I was amazed. How many people know Breaking Bad and know who Heisenberg? Yeah, okay. I was kind of shocked. I was reviewing the presentation with my wife, and she didn't even know who. So anyhow. But I'll say I don't condone the manufacture of meth, nor do I condone that type of criminal activity. But I think the representation of what that show was about and watching someone go from being a high school chemistry teacher to being a villainous drug lord, for lack of a better term, and to kind of set the stage, and we'll come back at the end to kind of set the stage. He transformed from a high school chemistry teacher to this villain Heisenberg, much like in the Star Wars trilogies, if you will, transforming in from Luke or from Anakin Skywalker to Darth Vader. So I want to kind of keep that in mind and how that happened. You know, that happened over seasons, and there were things that happened to him. There was cancer. There was a child with a special needs child. There was some business partners, some business issues that he had early on in his career that eventually led him down that road to being Heisenberg. So we'll talk about a little bit more about him and kind of wrap this all up a bit on the Breaking Bad theme, if you will. And I want to start off, so I come originally, my law enforcement career started with the U.S. Secret Service. The U.S. Secret Service had a few black eyes here lately, but still believe in the mission. I still believe the men and women there are dedicated to keeping leaders and infrastructure and the cyber world safe. And the one thing that the Secret Service does absolutely better than any organization on earth is behavioral threat analysis. You've heard it called a lot of different things, but BTA, if you will. And so in 2005, they originally partnered with Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, the SEI, up north, and published some papers and started looking at the behavioral pieces of an insider threat, okay? And let me tell you, whether you're talking about a physical attack or a cyber attack, there is always pre-attack related behavior. There's always going to be something that you missed or you ignored or you just went, yeah, he wouldn't do that. Yeah, that's just Jim. That's just the way Jim is. Just roll with it. Okay, so think about that, because I'm going to give you some nuggets. I'm going to talk about some cases here and there that have been adjudicated and that are closed. But think about that. There's always pre-attack related behavior. We sit back sometimes and we think it just happens. No, usually there's a cascade of events that happen prior to that. Here's another one from the behavioral threat analysis I want to give you. The best predictor of future behavior is previous behavior. Say that 1,000 times to yourself. The best predictor for future behavior is previous behavior. I want you to think about that. And also the comment, I love this one, hire slow, fire fast, right? Hire slow, fire fast. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how that's important because, again, what is an insider threat, right? It's someone with legitimate access to our organization, legitimate access to our assets who are causing us harm. So I like to bucketize things, and I kind of like to go in threes. So when I was going through this, obviously there's a laundry list of where the insider threats could be. But I also want you to reshape your mind and realize how you can have an insider that's just being negligent, right? They're still an insider threat to you, right? We all know our users are our biggest threat. Let's face it, right? With phishing, all that, they are absolutely our biggest threat. So we have these people that are being negligent, whether they intend to be, whether they don't know any better, whatever it may be. And then next we have, the malicious actors, right? These are our actors that are disgruntled, they're mad, they're frustrated, they want to do harm, they want to wreak havoc. Okay, they have a perceived. A lot of times it's a disgruntled employee. They have a resentment that they want to get back at someone for. And then lastly is our compromised think again, kind of in the realm with negligent. I'm clicking on a phishing email, or even worse, right? I'm working for a nation state actor. I'm working for North Korea. I'm working for a Russian actor. I'm working for the Chinese. I'm in a, whether you know this or not, and I'll tell you, when you look at top secret and secret background clearances, one of the first things that looks at is your financial wherewithal, right? If I am financially hurting, much like Walter White, I am more apt to lower my morality. I'm more apt to lower what ethically I'm willing to do and do a bad act, right? Especially if I'm going to be able to get out of debt or pay for my home, right? They're going to be very financially motivated to be an insider threat. So what do kind of these scenarios look like, right? So I spent some time at Nissan. Again, I've already said I spent some time at the Secret Service working a multitude of different cases. But the first thing on the list is the intellectual property theft, right? Our number one asset when I worked at Nissan, I managed cybersecurity there for 5 years, was the battery tech, right? A lot of battery tech. And at that time, really the only game in town was the Leaf, right? So that was the crown jewels of Nissan. We'll talk about how that's important, right? What are your crown jewels? What do you want to keep safe? And in Nissan, it was the battery tech, okay? You also have some other things that revolve around regulatory, right? There's certain things that you can't export, right? You can't sell a car to Iran, or you can't allow your GPS technology that's installed in your vehicle to leave and be sold to certain companies, right? And that is intellectual property within itself. Nissan at that time was spending a lot of money on self-driving cars, as well as every car manufacturer is. So think about where that is. I've already talked about the sabotage a little bit, right? Do we have a disgruntled employee? Do we have someone that is just mad, right? And remember, when you're looking at resentments and you're looking at grievances, you have to look at it from the perspective of that person. I want to use the word perceived. It's a perceived resentment, a perceived disgruntledness. It's what they believe. There's a couple other little pieces that factor into that as well. And one of them is perceived low pay, right? Are they constantly complaining? Are they constantly upset over their pay? Two other pieces that I'll bring up on the sabotage piece is time and grade, right? Time on the job, right? Do they have less than 6 months on? I'm a firm believer that every single solitary company, organization in the world should have a 1-year probationary period with 90-day touch points. And at some point, that person is not meeting expectations, or that behavior is not where you want it to be, get them out of the organization as fast as you can. Hire slow, fire fast, right? Fire fast. Because we all know probably where it's going to raise its head is about that 6-month part. And you're going to start going, this person's just not a good fit. Well, let's just give them time. They're transitioning and all that. No, right? Again, we got to invest in people. I'm not saying don't be empathetic, but provide policy and procedure, and provide a vehicle, if you will, where when you need to get this person out of your organization, you have the ability to do that. Fraud, right? Obviously, that's going to be a big insider threat, usually for purposes of financial gain, right? Misuse of authorized access. Where do we see that a lot, right? Well, I did this to make my job easier, right? So let's make sure we're being empathetic to our workers and understanding processes and procedures and ensuring we're not setting them up to break the rules, right? Well, I always just do this and that, and I put it on my personal laptop, and I make the changes I need to make, and then I go back over here, right? As security practitioners, are we preventing our employees from having the tools that they need to be successful, and are they just thumb driving that off, going over there to their personal device, doing whatever work they need to do, and then coming back into the environment? Right now we've got data leakage, right? We've got data exfiltration. So think about those things, right? Unintentional incidences, right? I'm just asleep at the wheel. I'm not paying attention. I'm not CrowdStrike, right? Unintentional incident for the most part, just asleep at the wheel, not necessarily paying attention to what's going on. And we had an incident of a global scale. National security espionage, clearly that's out there. Like, let's look at Israel, right? Israel infiltrated the supply chain and was able to put explosives in pagers, okay? Most recently, KnowBe4, the security company, right? They had North Korea nation-state actors using AI, applying for a job, and the individual got hired. And within a moment of getting access to KnowBe4's network, started doing what threat actors do and doing what bad guys do. So we've got to be cognizant to that. And then I throw workplace violence in here. Again, I think they're all, they're all a bit connected there. I'm going to talk about, a good reporting procedure and stuff. But those are the type of things that, you're ultimately going to deal with. All right. So when we break down kind of the incident types and impacts, there's no doubt, right, it's going to cost us some money. So when we go back and look at Carnegie's study, and I love the numbers, right? If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So when we look at the cost of these, I mean, the lion's shares, we have 15% that are over $1 million, another 27% that are 100,000 to $1 million. But wow, the reputational damage, right? Just that, you can't even measure it. How do you even measure the reputational damage? And I personally have been involved. I'll tell a war story here with a company. Let's talk about good vendor management. So a large company, a big company, if I said their name, you'd be like, oh my gosh, big company. They are outsourcing some credit card processing with a smaller company, with a smaller firm, right? In the midst of that, they have an insider at that company who decides to take 300,000 credit cards and sell them on the dark web. We had a dark web operation where we were posing as people buying credit cards, or as they were called, dumps or bins on the dark web. And so we actually convinced him that we didn't want to buy just a few. We wanted to buy the whole lot. And we negotiated a sales price of $25,000. And he shows up at the Opry Mills parking lot at Opry Mills with a thumb drive with 300,000 credit card numbers on it. Okay? So, as you can imagine, hugely impactful, right, for the company. The company that hired him is the one who took the hit on it. But my point in telling you all this is that company laid off 35 people and went out of business. It dried up after that. It could not afford the hit and the regulatory fines that came across, the credit monitoring it had to pay for, and so forth and so on. And then the other company has taken this hit reputationally, right? And obviously, and then all the other work that has to go into regulatory compliance, legal, and so forth. So think about that vendor management. I'll throw that in there. That vendor management is so important. Making sure that those agreements are in place, making sure your vendors are doing the right things. Again, I've seen cases where data has been lost, and you think you're dealing with a large expert company that's professional, that's come to your office and presented a professional appearance, and then you find out they're operating out of a strip mall in the worst part of Michigan that there is. And that's where your data's sitting, and they had a break-in and it just got stolen because that's where the servers were sitting with no security, no cameras, no alarms, not anything, right? Make sure you've got recourse for that. So a little bit about the types, right? We obviously have sabotage, fraud, and theft of IP. I feel like the theft of IP and the fraud are the higher numbers because they're financial, right? You're going to get financial gain from that. The sabotage is, I'm just mad and I want to burn down the world, right? But most of your threats are going to revolve around that theft of IP and fraud. All right. This is fascinating to me because I believe in the behavioral analysis. It works every time. What did I tell you? There's always pre-attack related behavior. There is always pre-attack related behavior. So in this case, when we look at stressors and we look at behaviors, if you'll notice, the number one concerning is went to work for a competitor. Well, that could be either a termination or a resignation. And then disgruntled is termination and resignation. Because I'm going to be pretty angry when you let me go, right? Let's face it. I'm not going to be real happy, right? And if I'm leaving, I may well be leaving because, again, I'm not happy. I'm a disgruntled employee and I want to go somewhere else. I want to get out of that, get out of that environment, right? Think about things like this as well. I believe that every human has an emotional load, and I think about it as a bridge. Okay, so we have a bridge that has a 10,000-pound weight limit. We've all seen it. We've all driving down the road and we see a sign that says weight limit 25,000 pounds. But I'm going to use 10,000 pounds because it's easier. And we have a 4,000-pound truck get on there we're still good. We have another 4,000 pound truck, we're still good. And then we have another 4,000 pound truck. We're now overweight by 2,000 pounds. Can that bridge fail? You bet it can. What does that look like in the real world? That looks like I just got diagnosed with cancer. My parent just died, who was my support system, and my wife got laid off. I mean, can you imagine the stressors, right? Or I'm getting a divorce or whatever it may be. So we have to pay attention to those behavioral pieces because so many times that's where our insiders are coming from, right? They're going to have that motivation, right? Everything in behavioral threat analysis works off means, motivation, ability, right? Are they motivated to do it? Do they have the means to do it? Do they have the ability to do it, right? And so when you start breaking down those three pieces and what can we remove out of that triad, right? Can we remove their access, right? Can we support them where they're not motivated? Can we, assure they don't have the ability to do it? So this is a balancing act, right? And this is kind of a hard slide to see, but we've got to balance. Ultimately, we're balancing the policies, the processes, and the tools against the people, the management, and the organization, right? And that's what we've got to do. We've got to ensure that we have those pieces and we're all managing that at the manager level, so directly with that individual, but also at the enterprise level, right? Is the enterprise level enabling that manager to ultimately be successful, right? And then we have the base of it is our policies, our procedures, our tools, our data usage, all of those things, right? And it's a balancing act, right? It's an absolute balancing act. How do we manage that, right? And we've got to ensure that we're ultimately supporting people and we're paying attention to those life stressors, that we've got good policies and that we've got good procedures. All right, so in that 7th edition that I showed you, and I'll mention that, they identify 22 critical places, 22 things, best practices that you can do. Okay, I'm going to talk about 3 or 4, and then I'm going to leave you some at the end that I believe this, you do this, you kind of get all the 22, okay? But the first thing is the critical assets, right? I've got a lot of different things on here, but it really just boils down to where are your crown jewels and what are your crown jewels, right? From a regulatory standpoint, do I have this, do I have that? I had a discussion with someone the other day in the healthcare industry. Did a phenomenal job MFAing their email. Great job. But their practice management with all their patient data open to the internet with no MFA. They're not clearly understanding regulatory compliance, nor are they understanding, is there a whole lot in email? Probably not, and depending how things are set, socials may get scrubbed, date of births may get scrubbed, whatever it may be. So know where your assets are, know what they are. One of the other things that we did at Nissan that I think was very, very, very successful is prioritizing assets and data as a high-value targets. We took executives, high-level people within the manufacturing space, and we put them in what we call the protected zone. And at that time, the availability of cybersecurity tools was not anything like it is now, and due to budgeting constraints, we only could protect part of the castle. Let's protect the part of the castle that's got the crown jewels in it, not the crown jewels, right? Let's protect that more than anything. So we would take those high-value targets, those individuals, we would do additional end-user training with their executive assistants. We would ensure that those individuals were given the level of cybersecurity that was commensurate with their position, with what data they had, what access they had. All right, I've already mentioned it, beginning with the hiring practice, right? I can't emphasize this enough. Make sure we're hiring the right people. If someone is making the hair on the back of your neck stand up, go ahead and believe it because it's probably true, okay? And there's probably some reason, right? Make sure that we're running candidates through multiple databases if we have that available. Make sure that we're doing good background checks. I go back to the know before. We've already seen nation-state actors using AI to apply for jobs and gets the jobs. I mean, wow, that's crazy. So it's out there, and that's happening, right? The other piece is a confidential method for reporting suspicious behaviors. there is one constant thing amongst all, and I'm going to give you the example of a physical threat, threats of violence, is every single school shooter or active shooter, mass shooter, at the adult age, somewhere along the line, someone raised their hand and said, I'm concerned. And what's absolutely fascinating is they'll use the word concerned. That's what they'll say. They'll use the word concerned. When someone comes to you and says, I'm concerned over X, you got to listen to them. You got to be empathetic and you got to pay attention. And I'm going to tell you why. A lot of times these people, are you going to get what I call false positives? 1,000%. 1,000%. I've worked in environments where staff has come forward and said, I think John is going to hurt somebody. Okay, well, tell me more. Well, he has a lot of guns on his Facebook. Okay, I go to John's Facebook and he's a deer hunter. Okay, well, a little more context to that. He had raised his voice in a meeting and had scared some people because he raised his voice. They go and now look at his Facebook page and end up with that. Now, here's the thing. We need to be empathetic. We need to listen to that employee and take that complaint respectfully. And I charge managers with doing that and putting a smile on their face and saying to that individual, hey, thanks for telling me about that. I really appreciate you saying something. Now, you may go over here and there may be nothing actionable you do whatsoever. And for lack of a better term, it's just a non-action item. But what you've done is you've set a culture up of reporting. And so many times this is what happens. Oh, don't worry about John. John's fine. He's not going to do anything. You're just being silly. Well, that employee now completely feels dismissed. And now when something happens that's super important, I don't know, there's somebody with, taking surveillance photos outside of the business, right? All dressed in black, and they've been there for 3 days in a row. And that person sees it, walks inside and goes, well, I'd say something, but nobody's going to listen to me. No one's going to pay attention. So it's so important that we listen to our employees and we take those complaints. Also, that goes into having a suspicious reporting mechanism. We have a reporting mechanism at the state of Tennessee with Homeland Security for school threats, and it has been highly successful, right? And for criminal and terroristic threats as well, but threats to life, right? Let's make sure that we have a way for people to raise their hand and go, hey, I'm worried about X or I'm worried about Y, and here's the deal. Let's make sure that we have that, right? Huge believer in EAP as well, right? When we have those problematic employees that we're managing, we can get them to some sort of EAP, right? I go back to, let's either push them up or push them out. That's the right answer, right? Nobody really wants to say that. It feels a little rough to say it, but it's true. I went through a management class, and I remember raising my hand and saying, hey, how do we deal with this, that, and the other? And the facilitator said, we're not their therapists, right? We're not their therapists. So that's where EAP can come in, help to get that help, and provide that person with the assistance they need. The other piece is being consistent with policy and procedure, right? If we're applying it to this employee, let's make sure that we're applying it to others. If we're applying this process, let's keep that consistent. Or if we do have an exception, let's make sure that we're properly documenting that exception. And then we have a business need for the exception, right? Do we have a business need? All right, so establish a baseline of normal behavior, right? A couple things here to talk about, right? Zero trust, right? Can't trust anybody or anything, right? Let's make sure that we're not blind and that we have the visibility, that we have the security controls to actually see what our employees are doing, right? Let's make sure that those tools are in place, that we're watching them on the SIM or whatever tool or whatever process and procedure that we have. Another piece, and this just goes into general cyber hygiene, right? At the end of the day, if this employee doesn't need VPN access, don't give them VPN access. And you say, well, it's a lot of overhead, then I've got to manage what employees get it and manage don't. No. Just kill it. If they don't need VPN access, they don't need after-hours access, if they have no legitimate need, they're not going to be working from home or whatever, then don't let them have VPN access, right? Ensuring our ports and protocols are turned off if we're not using those, and ensuring if they're not needed, we've got them turned off, right? Again, more on the cyber hygiene side, but you can see how that can quickly turn into an insider threat situation very, very quickly. One of the things that we did at Nissan that was, I think was extremely helpful is one, we black holed a lot of our nation state actor IP addresses, and you can figure out who those are. And then the next piece was we did some behavior monitoring around this individual has logged in from Nashville, Tennessee, and now all of a sudden they're logging in from Alberta, Canada. What is that all about, right? Why? So make sure that we're monitoring those types of things and seeing what is normal behavior where we know what abnormal behavior is. If we can, we can filter out the noise and our analysts don't end up with alert fatigue, right? They're not just getting alert after alert and dismissing it, right? If we can figure out what that normal behavior is. All right, unauthorized data exfil, right? If you don't need USB drives, turn them off. Just kill them, right? Fill them full, group policy, BIOS, whatever it may be. If they don't need USB access, cut it off, right? It may be a little bit of time and attention in terms of administration to do that and implement that, but absolutely, if you can do that, do that. It is absolutely the smart thing to do. Just kill it all the way. The other piece is, depending on, I definitely saw this at a lot of companies and still see it today, where there is not a good way for an employee to get data out, and you're all going to shake my head on this, so they go out and they create their own Box account, their own Google Drive account, what am I missing here? OneDrive account, whatever it may be, right? Ensure that we're monitoring for that, right? And now we got to deal with AI on top of that, right? How many have gone out and created a Chat GPT or a Grammarly or a Google Gemini account with their quote unquote work address? Have some way to monitor that, right? Some way to ensure, hey, are we blind here? Another place to see that, quite frankly, depending on how big your business unit is, look at the financials, right? It's all got to go through there. So do we have charges going to Box? Do we have charges going to some cloud provider, the shadow IT, right, that we don't know about? Put that in that class of insider threats, right? And then obviously restrict data transfer, FTP. If we don't need those, cut them off, shut them off, reduce that attack surface as little as we humanly possibly can. All right, so I talked a lot about the insider threat, but at the end of the day, it's just all basic cyber hygiene, right? And all basic cybersecurity. So I wanted you to leave with a few resources, if you will. Big fan of the 18 CIS controls. CIS is a phenomenal organization. I work and talk with them almost weekly. A lot of their services are free. I just cannot say enough good things about CIS. Okay, so definitely a resource you can go to if you are budget constrained. That is a good free resource that is going to be reliable and is going to give you what you need. A couple other places, obviously CISA, so many free resources there. I want to talk a little bit about tabletops too. There's some great tabletops on CISA, but also think about a tabletop for an insider threat. Have you done one? What would that look like? Think about that for a minute too. The other thing I want to add is think multidisciplinary threat team. It's kind of a term for violence prevention, but it works great in the cyber realm. When you're dealing with some of these things and these problematic employees in some of these events, incidences, pull in legal, pull in HR, pull in everyone you can pull out, or pull in rather yet, pull them out of a meeting and into yours. Right? You want as many people at the table as you possibly can, right? You want to transfer that risk. You want to get as many people that are opining on the situation as humanly possible, right? And trying to bring that to a resolution and to a safe resolution. So don't ever forget that. Bring as many stakeholders to the table as you possibly can and make sure at a minimum legal and HR are there, and the earlier you notify them, the better off they are. Now, could they be a roadblock? Absolutely. You may have all your ducks in a row and he or she is on a PIP and they are ready to walk them out the door and HR's approved it, and all of a sudden you bring legal in and legal says, nope, we're not doing this. Ugh. So, 2, think about a good termination policy, right? Everyone does decent probably with onboarding, but think about offboarding, right? Think about offboarding and making sure that you're getting your timing right, right? I've definitely seen a lot of insider events and incidences that started with they're getting told they're terminated, they're getting told their position is being eliminated or whatever it may be. They're sitting at home, they still have virtual access to the network, their VPN is still active, and they just start deleting stuff right and left. Right, they are going to cause as much havoc as they possibly can. So ensuring that once that meeting is over, or maybe mid-meeting, which again may be hard to do because you're discussing them on Teams, but again, maybe on the level of employee it makes sense to fly out and meet them somewhere, have them come to a hotel and do that termination in person, right? You've just got to feel it out and see ultimately what makes the most sense. The other two things I'll mention is the NIST framework, another great cybersecurity framework, and then the Tennessee Cyber Hub. If you'll just Google Tennessee Cyber Hub, or the state of Tennessee IT department, if you will, has some great resources out there. A lot of them do link back to NIST and CIS and CERT, but kind of a collaboration there of different resources that'll help you out. And I want to talk about this, and this is, we're now back to Breaking Bad. We're now back to Walter White and his transformation of why he did what he did, right? Now, if anybody's watched the show or knows anything about it, in the beginning of the show, he did it all under the auspice of, I've been diagnosed with cancer, I'm dying, I'm terminal, I have a special needs, I believe he had cerebral palsy, I have a special needs child, I'm working as a chemistry teacher, making $50,000 a year, and then having to work at a car wash, and he had to clean the cars of some of his students who would ridicule him and make fun of him, right? Just a man not at a good place in life. So he lowers his morals and ethics and now becomes flexible and decides to start cooking meth, right? And as the season progresses, you see his look change. You see the way he dresses change. You see him wear the fedora and the sunglasses and even take on the name Heisenberg, right? That was his alter ego. And one of the things that really got me is he made a couple quotes. And is anybody, because I just blanked on what his wife's name was? Skylar. Thank you, Skylar. I knew it was close, just like a Buick. So as he's saying to Skylar, and he's justifying what he's doing, no, this whole thing, all of this, it was about me, right? It was about him, right? He had lowered all his morals and ethics and was doing all of this. But at the end of the day, the next quote gets it. I did it for me. I liked it. It was good. He was good at it. He was good at it. That was the other piece. He was really good at it. And I see that with a lot of investigations that I do where these individuals, again, I had another big case when I was at Secret Service, and this individual was, father was a multimillionaire. And I remember asking him why he did it. He goes, it was fun. And this guy did $35 million worth of fraud. He said it was fun and had been running 4 or 5 years on the dark net, selling bank numbers, selling credit card numbers, doing data exfil. I mean, this was a big case we worked. And when it all boiled down to it, I kind of was hoping he'd say, oh, I've got a sick child, I've got this, I've got that. No, he said it was fun. I enjoyed it. And I'd never enjoyed anything else in my life. So it's a little scary, right, on the motivation piece. But like Walter White said, I did it for me. I liked it. It was good. I was good at it. And I was really, and he was going to probably say I was really good at it, but I was alive, right? That's why he was doing it, right? So we've got to be mindful of this, right? And understand that when we're sitting at a group and a table that we're not too biased when we're trying to figure out, was someone capable of this, or they would never do that, or, oh, this can't be true. That there has to be a misunderstanding. We've got to understand that sometimes that motivation may just be, I wanted to get that adrenaline rush, right? I want to feel alive again. So a couple closing thoughts. If I kind of wrap all of this up into what I think the three big buckets, and then we'll take some questions. Is first of all, we got to have good corporate policies. We got to have good corporate policies. In all my environments I've worked in, doing internals, doing criminals, doing all different types of investigations, there's nothing more frustrating than having something and then going to the policy and went, what? We don't have a policy on that? No, we don't have a policy on it. And then, of course, we've got to go make one, right? So making sure that our corporate policies are in a line to keep our assets safe, to keep our people safe, to keep our intellectual property safe. We've got to ensure that that's there. Then just the basic technical controls, right? So we've got policy and procedure. We've got the basic technical controls, right? Are we blind? Can we see what we need to see? Are we preventing people from doing bad stuff? They plug a thumb drive up, doesn't work. That's great. Now we've stopped the exfil via USB drive, right? Do we have those controls that are in place? And then the third one that might make you wonder, what does that icon mean? What is it? Is the behavioral piece, right? Are we taking the behavior? Are we paying attention to the behavior? I can't say enough about that. That is so, so important to understand what's going on in our employees' life, to understand when they do something perhaps that they shouldn't be doing, that we have a good understanding of why they did that. What is their motivation for that? And ultimately supporting them. And don't forget, as I said, if we've got to push them out, we've got to push them out, right? I'm a huge believer in that 1-year probationary period and 90-day touch points, and we're holding them very accountable. And they're either going to self-select to move themselves out of the organization because they're not meeting expectations, or we put them on a PIP and we get them out, and we're have some legal standing, hopefully, and don't end up with a wrongful term lawsuit because we're still within that 1-year probationary period. Okay? So just think about that a little bit within your organization. The other closing thought I'll leave you with is back to the behavioral piece, and I'd be curious how many people in here have either seen this with an employee or heard it. Well, they're good when they're good and they're bad when they're bad. That you put that in with a disgruntled employee that has 6 months on the job, they're doing some stuff they're not supposed to. The studies show it. At the end of the day, the studies show it, right? That's what they're going to show. All right, there's my contact information. That's my cell. Please don't put it on the bathroom stall. That's my email. If you need anything, feel free to reach out to me with anything. So I got to have at least one question or I can't stop talking.
We hold on 1 second before we do the in-house questions. We have a couple online questions.
Let's do online questions.
And so I'll start with one, and then we'll go to the house, and then we'll come back to me.
Fair enough.
So this is from Rochelle Fine. I hope I'm saying that correctly. How can organizations effectively prioritize and implement security measures for critical assets in a rapidly evolving threat landscape while balancing operational efficiency and compliance requirements?
Wow, that's a mouthful.
I can rephrase it if you'd like. Or
no. I think hopefully we'll hit what she's asking here. I think we've got to identify the crown jewels and then prioritize from there, right? We've got to identify, especially the regulatory and compliance data, if we have PHI, if we have PII, if we have that stuff, those crown jewels, those things that are going to get us regulatory fines, that are going to get us on the cover of the Wall Street Journal and the USA Today. We've got to identify those first, address those first, and then start that wish list of what we're going to tackle after that. So I think that's the first place. Data mapping, understanding where the crown jewels are. Where's the most risk? I believe right here.
So the last piece you talked about behavior of employees. How do you draw the line not to be intrusive and leave their privacy alone, and also at the same time understand how they are financially or behavioral?
That's a great question. So in the hiring process, so he's asking how do we manage people, right? How do we manage behaviors and maybe potentially manage bad behaviors? I think in the hiring process, right, if we're able to run a credit check, maybe we run a credit check, right? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Again, that's something you've got to figure out what sector you're in. You've got to figure out how your attorneys feel, how your legal counsel feels, just what's the culture and appetite within your organization. The next piece is, I think, honestly, it's the solid one-on-one. It's the solid one-on-one, right? And sometimes I'll give an example of what I did in management. I didn't do my one-on-ones over Teams. I did them over FaceTime. I just felt like it worked better. And I felt like you just kind of dropped a little bit. You're on FaceTime. It's not quite so corporate-ish, right? It's not so institutional. And, I'd maybe go out on the back porch and hit my employee up that worked in California, and we'd have a FaceTime conversation. And I felt like it went better. So that's the time to reduce those risks and say, hey man, what's going on with you? Or if you notice, I don't know, they're repeatedly calling out. Hey, is everything okay? Well, maybe they say yes. And then you respond, or of course they say, yeah, I don't want to talk about it or whatever. Maybe you say, hey, you know what? My job here is to support you. My job is to make sure you're successful. What could I do to help you? And maybe, again, it's just moving a schedule off. Or, hey, would it be helpful if you started 2 hours later? That can even start the conversation, right? You've got an employee that's consistently supposed to start at 8. They're 9:30 every morning. But if you went to them and said, hey, John, what about we change your start time to 10? Ultimately, it helps you out. It gives us some extra coverage in the afternoon up into the later hours. And you know what John may say back? That'd be great. You know, my wife's got cancer, and I've been having chemo every morning with her. He may have been afraid to tell you because he thought, wow, this is going to get me terminated. They're going to think I'm not loyal to the company, or I'm not my head is somewhere else. So, just empathy, ultimately empathy. So, another online question, I think.
The second online question is from Thomas Hanks. There have been literally thousands of cases of North Korean actors obtaining remote IT positions, including privileged credentials. All of these cases involve cooperation with U.S.-based individuals providing remote desktop access to company equipment. What is the government doing to mitigate the risk?
At this point, education, right? Education is only so much right we can do, pushing out that education and reminding people, hey, that these threat actors are out there, right? CISA is doing that proactively. CIS has done a lot of that as well. I'm here today to talk to you about it, right? And say, make sure you know who you're hiring, right? Ensure that you know who you're hiring. We're in a workforce where a lot of times we're desperate for headcount. We get headcount approved. I know from my experience, if you didn't get that headcount hired in a certain amount of time, the business was coming back and going, well, you've gone 90 days without them. You can go forever without them, right? So we want to hire fast. We want to get people in there. But unfortunately, if we don't have the checks and balances in doing that, then we're eventually going to become victim to one of those scams.
So I think I hear you saying at a higher level, business / the corporation needs to be better aligned with IT, more specifically security. Am I misinterpreting that, or is that really the high-level message? Is get the business together with security instead of it being thrown over the wall?
Right, exactly. So we're baking it in instead of bolting it on, right? And back to my multidisciplinary, right? Do we have everybody, all the people with a seat at the table, right, and understands the importance? So I appreciate you bringing that up. That's a great point. That's a great point.
We have one more online question.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, check that. 2 more. From Jordan online. How do you convince smaller businesses to allow you to enforce policies related to cybersecurity? Example, no policy on allowing company email on personal phones.
Wow, that's a tough one. It is, yeah. It's ultimately a challenge. I think that's a risk discussion, and I hate to be fire and brimstone, but sometimes you just got to go to the executives with fire and brimstone and saying this absolutely does not need to happen. The other piece too that I found to be very, very successful, Ron Emanuel, who was Obama's chief of staff and eventually the mayor of Chicago, never let a good crisis go to waste. Never let a good crisis go to waste. So if you have cybersecurity meetings, if you have committees, and you're up there with your executives, start to seed things like that. Seed different things and go, I want to bring this up. And I know I've been there. They're all sitting down at their laptop and they're not paying attention. And then you say something and they pop up. Well, pay attention to what you said and write that down, and that's what you're going to say next time. But it may take you 3, 4, 5, 6 months, 3, 4, 5, 6 meetings, and then just wait. And then something pops up in the headlines. And if you've done it well, you may get an email from that SVP who says, hey, Lee, is this something we need to be worried about? Never let a good crisis go to waste. And then from there, push it's a positive agenda. I don't mean agenda negatively. push that agenda through, or rip it from the headlines yourself. Hey, I didn't know if you saw this or not, but our competitor got hit with blah, 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 blah. As I've been saying for 6 months, I've had these concerns. Can we get together and have a discussion about it? You've just got to be strategic and never let a good crisis go to waste.
We have one final online question from Mike Atmore. In what ways do you feel that company culture contributes to insider threats?
Well, I think it heavily contributes, especially nothing kills corporate culture than bad behavior being allowed to happen. So I think it is absolutely a cultural piece that has to be enforced, not enforced, that's such a bad word, but built. I should say built. You've got to have that corporate culture of, we've all seen this, if you see something, say something, even that as well, right? If you see something, say something. We've got to have our employees who have a culture of safety, where if they're seeing something, they're saying something, or if they have a concern. And ultimately, Simon Sinek talks about it a lot, is they got to feel safe. That's the one thing our employees don't really necessarily feel. They don't feel safe walking up. That's why I'm such a believer. If an employee brings a concern, you smile no matter how silly it may be, because it's not silly to them. You smile, you take that complaint, and then you give them feedback. I appreciate you bringing this to me. Thanks so much. I'm glad you brought it forward, because now you're bringing that culture of reporting, and I call them tripwires. Now you have tripwires through your entire organization, whether it be a physical threat of violence or some type of virtual threat. So.
Hi, so you mentioned that it's a concern, like know who you hire. It's a concern that you could be hiring nation state bad actors who are trying to infiltrate your organization. So how do you tell them apart from people who are just foreign-born, who are just trying to get hired within your organization? And how would you keep that from turning into, say, like xenophobia within the company culture?
Great, phenomenal question. So the first is you may want to outsource a background check, right? The background checks, at least the ones that I have seen, vary from really good to really bad and everything in between, right? So are we looking at social media? Are we out there on the internet looking at a footprint, right? Now, a lot of times the terminology in the intelligence world and the criminal world is they'll be backstopped. They'll be backstopped. So you'll find something. Oh, okay, well, they must be legitimate. The other piece is you've got to decide, do I want to let this individual, unfortunately, you can't even necessarily use geographical locations. Do I want to let this individual work from a foreign soil, right? Does this have to be a U.S.-based piece? Depending on level of access, depending on how critical and how much damage that individual would be, do you do an in-person interview? Do you do at least one in-person interview to get that person in front of you to see how that feels, right? That's one step that you can take. So a lot of different things out there. I feel like though there'll be red flags. Like there was a red flag with this Know Before deal, right? A lot of people don't know this. My camera's glitching. I got a problem with my camera. That's how they dealt with the on-screen piece. Now, is that going to get much better with AI? Absolutely. So it's going to come a point when that's not going to be enough. So I think you just have to take a multi-layered approach and 100,000 foot and go, what's my risk here? Another piece too, and this is done in the federal government side, this is done in the cleared space, is you are limited what access you have until your clearance is done. Now, some of it is the government's not always that efficient in getting someone a security clearance because it takes an enormous amount of work to clear someone to top secret information. So the first 6 months or year that you're on a job that has cleared access and that has access to cleared information, you won't necessarily have access or be able to get into it. So perhaps escalated privileges, admin level, perhaps there's that, going back to probation, there's a 30-day probation, a 60-day, a 90-day, and hopefully some pre-attack related behaviors or things pop out and we're able to mitigate. We're able to mitigate. Anything else? Going once? I think we're good. I'll be around. I'll be floating around. So if anybody's got any questions they didn't want to ask publicly, you can grab my ear and ask them privately. But thank you.